Darkness gradually descended as Daniel drove along the deserted road. The cold wind lashed against the windows, carrying a chill that seeped into his bones. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road ahead. But then, a shadow staggered into his lane, forcing him to slam on the brakes. It was a German shepherd. Its fur was matted with dust, its legs trembled with every step, yet its eyes remained resolute. It was walking. No, it was searching for something. Daniel frowned. This was a remote area, with no houses or rest stops for miles. A stray dog wandering here was anything but normal. Slowly, he pulled over and stepped out of the car. Immediately, the dog lifted its head and looked straight at him. There was no fear, no hesitation. On the contrary, it took a step forward, then suddenly clamped onto his sleeve and tugged hard. Daniel froze. It was trying to lead him somewhere. His heart pounded faster. What was waiting ahead? Daniel hesitated for a moment. The icy wind cut through his skin, but the way the dog looked at him, desperate, pleading, made it impossible for him to turn away. All right, I'll follow you," he muttered, pulling his jacket zipper higher before stepping toward the dog. As soon as he moved, the dog bolted ahead, but never too far. Every few steps, it glanced back, as if making sure he was still following. Daniel looked at the road. Not a single car, no streetlights. Only darkness stretched around him, the bare trees lining the roadside howling in the wind. They walked for hundreds of meters, then miles. Every step the dog took was heavy. It was exhausted, but it didn't stop. Daniel could feel it. Something was terribly wrong ahead. Then, suddenly, the dog veered off into a narrow trail by the roadside. Bushes crowded the path. Dry branches scraped against his sleeves as he stepped through. The deeper he went, the colder and eerily silent the air became. Then, a faint shape emerged right in front of him. Daniel froze. Amidst the fallen leaves and the snow-covered ground, a man lay motionless. His body was curled up, his clothes tattered. His breath was faint, barely visible in the freezing air. The dog rushed to his side, nuzzling into his stiffened arm, whining desperately. Daniel felt his chest tighten. It had traveled for miles, just to find someone who could help its owner. But was it already too late? Daniel knelt down, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out and touched the man's wrist. Ice cold. Not good. The pulse was too weak. The man was teetering on the edge of life and death. The dog remained pressed against its owner, its eyes filled with worry, its cold nose nudging his face as if trying to wake him up. Daniel couldn't waste another second. "No, old man, you're not giving up on me." He tore off his jacket and wrapped it around the man, before quickly checking for any signs of life. His breathing was faint, but still there. Daniel took a deep breath. He couldn't leave him out here any longer. He looked at the dog and said firmly, "We're going to save him. I promise." Without hesitation, Daniel lifted the man into his arms. He was frighteningly light, as if he hadn't eaten properly in days. The dog immediately followed, unwilling to leave its owner's side for even a second. Every step Daniel took was a race against death. The icy wind cut through his skin. His feet slipped on the snow-covered ground, but he couldn't stop. His car was still parked on the road, just a few hundred meters away. But time was running out. Would the man make it? The man's breaths grew weaker. Daniel could feel his body turning colder in his arms. No, this can't be happening. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself to move faster, ignoring the freezing air slicing through his muscles. The dog ran beside him, each step heavy with exhaustion, but it didn't stop. Its eyes never left its owner, filled with worry. Finally, the car emerged from the darkness. Using his elbow, Daniel yanked the door open and quickly placed the man in the back seat. His body was nearly motionless. Daniel's hands trembled as he touched the man's neck, searching for warmth, for any sign of life. Silence. No, no, no. Don't do this to me. Without hesitation, he leaned down, placed both hands over the man's chest, and started compressions. Once, twice, 3 times. Come on, breathe. You've made it this far. You're not giving up now. The dog whimpered beside him, eyes filled with fear. 4 times, 5 times. Then, a faint breath escaped the man's bluish lips. Daniel's heart pounded. He was still alive. Without wasting a second, Daniel jumped into the driver's seat and floored the gas. The tires skidded slightly on the snow before the car sped forward. Hold on, old man. We're almost there. The dog curled up against its owner's legs, as if trying to give him the last bit of warmth it had left. The car sped through the night, its tires gripping the slippery road. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the path ahead, his knuckles turning white from gripping the steering wheel too hard. He stole a quick glance at the back seat. The man was still motionless, his breaths weak, but still there. The dog pressed tightly against its owner, whimpering softly, as if begging him not to give up. Daniel slammed the gas pedal harder. Hold on, old man, just a little longer. The first streetlights flickered into view through the darkness. The hospital was right ahead. Daniel didn't bother looking for a parking spot. He hit the brakes hard, and the car screeched to a stop as the door flew open. Scooping the man into his arms, he sprinted toward the emergency entrance. We need help. Immediately, medical staff rushed toward them. One placed an oxygen mask over the man's face. Another checked his pulse. Daniel stepped back, chest heaving, his hands still trembling from the cold. The dog tried to follow, but a doctor held it back. Daniel knelt beside it, resting a hand on its head, meeting its deep brown eyes. We've done everything we could. Now let them take care of the rest. Daniel stood motionless in front of the emergency room doors. Every second felt like an eternity. Beside him, the dog sat curled up, its eyes fixed on the door, the place where its owner was fighting for his life. A cold wind swept through the corridor, but Daniel felt nothing except the crushing weight of worry in his chest. He had never believed in fate, but in this moment, all he could do was hope that the dog's journey across miles hadn't been in vain. Then, the doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, his expression unreadable. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. The patient was in severe hypothermia, the doctor said. We did everything we could to stabilize him. Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tightening. Then, the doctor offered a small smile. And he's going to make it. A long, pent-up breath escaped Daniel's lungs. He let himself lean back against the wall, closing his eyes for a few seconds. The dog let out a soft whimper. But this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was relief. Daniel sank onto the waiting room bench, his head bowed, hands resting on his knees. He had never felt this exhausted. But the most important thing was, they had done it. The man he had fought to save had survived. Beside him, the dog gently licked his hand, as if offering its own silent thanks. Daniel let out a small chuckle, the first since this race against death had begun. He reached out, running his fingers through the dog's thick fur, now slightly warmer. You did good, buddy. The dog gazed up at him with deep, knowing eyes, as if it understood every word. Just then, a nurse stepped out from the emergency room, offering a gentle smile. He wants to see both of you. Daniel stood up, glancing at the dog beside him. It had heard the nurse's words too. Its ears perked up, eyes filled with anticipation. "Come on, buddy." He stepped into the hospital room, the dog following closely, each step cautious yet eager. Inside, the old man lay in the hospital bed, a blanket pulled up to his chest. His face was pale, but there was a flicker of light in his eyes. He stirred slightly, and when he saw the dog, tears welled up in his aged eyes. "Max, is that you?" His voice trembled, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The dog bolted forward, pressing its head against the bed, whimpering with emotion. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a miracle. The old man's trembling hand reached out, brushing against the dog's thick, warm fur. "I thought I had lost you forever." Max nuzzled into his arms, as if trying to make up for all the lost time. Daniel stood still, watching the scene before him. All this dog had ever wanted was to find the one who mattered most. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. Are you okay?" The old man looked up at him, his weary eyes filled with both gratitude and exhaustion. "Son, you saved my life, and so did Max." He reached out, gently stroking the dog's head, his gaze tinged with sorrow. "Do you know how far he traveled to find someone who could help me?" Daniel said nothing, simply listening in silence. The old man let out a slow sigh, his voice laced with bitterness and fatigue. "I once had a home, a good life, but then everything fell apart." He paused, staring into the distance, as if lost in painful memories. "My wife passed away. Illness and debt swallowed me whole. Within a year, I lost everything. My house, my job, everything." Daniel clenched his fists, feeling the depth of the man's pain in every word. Only Max stayed. The old man glanced down at the dog, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "He never left my side. Whether I slept under a bridge or in a freezing park, he was always there." Max looked up at him, ears twitching, as if he too remembered those harsh days. "But last night," the old man's voice grew weaker. "I couldn't take it anymore. The hunger, the cold. It was too much. I collapsed by the roadside, and—" His voice caught. He raised a trembling hand to wipe away the tear rolling down his cheek. "And Max left. I thought he had abandoned me forever." Max let out a soft whimper, pressing his head into the old man's hand, as if to say that could never happen. Daniel swallowed hard, an unshakable feeling rising in his chest. "But he didn't," the old man whispered. "He went to find help. He walked for miles, through the freezing cold, just to save me." He looked straight at Daniel, his eyes shining with emotion. "Do you know what that means?" Daniel couldn't find the words, but he knew. He understood. A dog's love for its owner, deeper than anything else in the world. The hospital room fell silent, save for Max's soft breathing and the slow, steady rhythm of the old man's heartbeat. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. He had never imagined a dog could do something like this. Travel miles through the freezing cold, refusing to give up, just to find someone who could save its owner. But now, it had, and that changed everything. "Do you have anyone to call?" Daniel asked hesitantly. The old man let out a small chuckle, but it was tinged with sadness. "No, son, I have no one left. My family has been gone for a long time." Daniel bit his lip instinctively. He had expected that answer, but hearing it out loud still made something ache inside him. Max looked up, gently licking his owner's hand, as if to tell him he wasn't alone. "Thank you for stopping," the old man said, his voice trembling. "If it weren't for you and Max, I wouldn't be here." Something stirred deep within Daniel, something he had tried to ignore for years. The feeling of wanting to help, of wanting to make a difference. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "You can't stay here forever. When you recover, do you have anywhere to go?" The old man looked down at his frail hands, silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. Daniel hesitated. A part of him wanted to walk away, to go back to his normal life, simple, quiet, free of complications. But then he looked at Max. That dog never gave up. It had come all this way, just to save the one it loved most. So how could he walk away now? He sighed, then offered a tired smile. "If you don't mind, I might be able to help you find a place to stay, at least until you can get back on your feet." The old man looked up, eyes wide. You mean that?" Daniel nodded. Max's tail wagged, his eyes shining with joy. The old man stared at Daniel for a long moment, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. You're really willing to help a stranger like me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel shrugged, trying to appear casual. "You're not a stranger to Max, and I think anyone with a dog that loyal is worth helping." Max looked up at them both, ears perked, tail wagging slightly, as if he understood exactly what was happening. The old man turned away, blinking rapidly to hide the tears threatening to fall. "I have nothing to repay you with, only my gratitude." Daniel let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You don't owe me anything, old man. Just make sure you and Max don't end up back on the streets." A brief silence filled the room. Then, suddenly, Max jumped onto the bed, nuzzling into his owner's chest, letting out a happy whimper. The old man laughed, a real laugh, free of burden, free of sorrow. 2 days later, the old man was discharged from the hospital. Daniel parked his car outside the hospital entrance, with Max sitting patiently beside him, eyes bright with anticipation. When the doors swung open, the old man stepped outside, still a little unsteady, but stronger than before. He knelt down, stroking Max's head, whispering something only the dog could hear. Max wagged his tail furiously, as if he had finally found peace. Daniel opened the car door. "Let's go." The old man looked at him, then at Max, and gave a small nod. The three of them got into the car, and this time, they were no longer alone. They were a family. Some encounters may seem like mere coincidences, but in reality, they are fate. Max never gave up, traveling miles through the freezing cold to save his owner. And Daniel, a man who once wanted to avoid all complications, ultimately found something he never knew he needed: a family. Share this story with anyone who believes in unconditional love, because sometimes the most miraculous things come from the loyalty of a dog. What do you think about Max's loyalty? Have you ever witnessed a miraculous story like this? Share this video with anyone who believes in the unconditional love of animals. And if you believe that every animal deserves a loving home, hit like and subscribe to help spread more incredible stories like this one. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming story on Unbreakable Bonds.